Let her handle the tip if she's got it. Dad's words sliced through the warm chatter like a sharp knife. It wasn't loud, but it carried. The table fell quiet for a heartbeat before laughter rippled around, rising like a wave that crashed straight into me. This isn't just another family dinner. It's the night the laughter stopped. Watch the full story, you don't want to miss the twist. I smiled. A practiced, polite smile, the kind I'd worn 1,000 times at this very table. I folded my napkin slowly, placing it beside my untouched plate. He thought it was just another harmless joke. He always did. The restaurant's lights were dim but soft, casting a honeyed glow over the dark wooden walls. It was 7:46 p.m. on a crisp autumn night, and through the glass windows behind Dad, I could see the amber streetlights flickering like tired fireflies. Waiters glided between tables with trays balanced on their palms. A faint scent of roasted garlic and butter drifted from the kitchen. Everything was calm on the surface, exactly how I'd planned it. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing against the cool leather of my black card. My pulse was steady. For years, moments like these made my stomach twist, but tonight felt different. Dad leaned back in his chair, his grin wide, watching me like a performer he'd seen stumble before. "Oh, come on," he said, waving his hand at the others. "She's a big shot now, right? Let's see it." My sister snorted into her wine. My brother-in-law muttered something under his breath that made him chuckle. Across the table, my cousin gave me that familiar pitying look, a half-smile that said, "We both know your place." I looked at each of them in turn, letting their amusement wash over me. Controlled. Observing. "Sure," I said softly, sliding the card out. The black gleam caught the candlelight. A few eyebrows lifted. They didn't expect me to agree so easily. The waiter approached with the small leather bill folder. I noticed the slight bow of respect he gave me, one that didn't match the way he greeted everyone else. It was subtle, almost hidden, but I saw it. So did the general manager, who had been standing near the bar, pretending to oversee the staff. His eyes flicked toward me more than once. They all thought I didn't notice. I did. As I handed over the card, I heard Dad whisper something to my sister. She laughed too loudly. The sound grated like metal on glass. I could have confronted him then and there, but why waste the moment? Some scenes deserve time to breathe. The waiter disappeared toward the counter. For a moment, everything slowed. The clinking of cutlery, the hum of other conversations, the muted jazz playing overhead, all faded into the background. I watched their faces. Every smirk. Every side glance. And then the small details began to stand out, details I'd trained myself to pick up on over the years. The manager quietly instructing the cashier to handle the payment personally. A hostess walking past and whispering, eyes darting toward our table. A pair of older diners at the next table murmuring, recognizing my father but giving me curious looks. They didn't know it, but every little action was part of the stage I'd set. Dad raised his glass, tapping it lightly. "To family," he announced. "And to surprises." "To surprises," they echoed, some genuinely amused, some half-interested. I tilted my glass of water toward them. "Oh, there will be surprises," I murmured, just loud enough for the cousin on my left to hear. She frowned, unsure if I was joking. I didn't elaborate. The restaurant door opened briefly, letting in a cool gust of wind that made the candles flicker. I glanced toward the entrance. The GM had disappeared from his usual post. My heart didn't race, it slowed. That was my tell always. Calm before the reveal. When the waiter returned, the leather folder in his hand, I noticed the slight hesitation in his step. He wasn't nervous. He was deliberate. Behind him, the GM followed. Dad was too busy making another joke about modern women and their fancy carts to notice. My sister rolled her eyes dramatically, looking at me like I was still the naive girl from years ago who couldn't even split a bill. But the GM noticed me. And I noticed him. "Everything all right?" Dad asked the waiter, loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. The waiter offered a polite smile. "Sir." The system just took a second to verify. Dad leaned closer to my brother-in-law, whispering something with a smirk. Their laughter bubbled again. I sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly on the table. I didn't need to say a word. The moment was unfolding exactly as I'd planned. I glanced around the restaurant slowly. This wasn't just any place. Every corner of this dining room held memories, some sharp, some quietly humiliating. The far booth near the window? That was where, years ago, my family had laughed about my failed marriage. The private room behind the curtain? That's where they'd mocked my little side business, assuming it would crumble like everything else they thought I touched. They didn't know the truth about this place. Not yet. A group of waiters lined near the counter, glancing our way. The GM adjusted his suit jacket and approached with a purposeful stride. The entire atmosphere shifted by a fraction, small enough that only those who were paying attention could feel it. Dad straightened in his seat. He wasn't expecting him to approach. Is there a problem? Dad asked again, louder this time. His voice carried a note of irritation, the kind he used when things didn't revolve around him. Not at all, the GM said smoothly, stopping at our table. His eyes met mine briefly. A flicker. A nod. Just making sure everything goes perfectly for our special guest. I didn't respond. I held his gaze for half a second longer than polite, then lowered it back to my folded hands. A subtle signal. My sister leaned toward Dad. Do you know him? Dad chuckled. These places always act like big shots when they see a black card. Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just for show. I smiled at my sister then. Not sarcastic. Not bitter. Just knowing. She shifted uncomfortably. The waiter set the bill folder down. Dad, assuming it was standard procedure, reached for it. But the GM gently placed his hand over the folder, stopping him mid-movement. I'll handle this, the GM said, his voice soft but firm. His attention returned to me. If Ms. Ross doesn't mind. The table fell silent. The use of my name, Ms. Ross, was deliberate. Not ma'am. Not miss. Not her. Dad blinked. Ms. Ross? He repeated, confused, like the title didn't belong in this room. I met the GM's eyes again. Go ahead, I said calmly. Attention settled over the table like fog. Everyone was trying to piece it together. Why the GM was here, why he was addressing me with such deference, why the waiter suddenly looked at me like I wasn't just another customer. I could have explained. I could have ended the suspense right there. But where's the satisfaction in that? Instead, I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water, the ice clinking softly. My heartbeat remained steady. Dad cleared his throat. Well, he said too loudly, I guess the machine finally decided she's good for it. Laughter returned, but it was thinner this time. Hesitant. A few forced chuckles. Even my sister's smile didn't reach her eyes. Something in the room had shifted, and they all felt it, even if they didn't understand it yet. The GM remained standing beside our table. He didn't rush off like he usually did. He was waiting for the perfect moment. So was I. My father leaned back again, attempting to reclaim control of the scene. What's next? He asked, lifting his glass. A parade. I set my glass down gently. Something like that, I replied evenly. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, the GM stepped forward. Excuse me, everyone, he said, his voice rising just enough to command attention. I have something I'd like to say. Every head at the table turned toward him. Forks paused midair. Conversations around us slowed. And I smiled. Because this was exactly where I wanted the story to pause. As the GM stood beside our table, clearing his throat to speak, the flickering candlelight caught his suit buttons, making them gleam like small signals only I could read. My family leaned back in their chairs, their laughter quieting into an uneasy hush. Their confusion was thick, almost tangible, and I let it linger in the air like the last note of a song. But before his voice filled the room, my mind slipped backward, not out of panic, but with the controlled precision of someone who knows exactly why they've chosen this battleground. I wasn't in this restaurant by accident. This place had history. My history. The same mahogany walls, the same smell of sizzling butter, the same vintage jazz humming faintly through hidden speakers. Nothing here had changed. Except me. I still remember the first time I sat at this very table after my marriage collapsed. It was 4 years ago, a cold February night. I had walked in wearing my thrifted wool coat, clutching a crumpled tissue in my pocket, thinking maybe dinner with family would make the ache a little easier. I was wrong. Dad had insisted we celebrate my return home like it was some kind of amusing family event. My sister brought her perfect little family. My brother-in-law talked about his promotions between bites of steak. And I sat quietly, picking at cold mashed potatoes, pretending not to hear their whispers. She really thought that little bakery of hers would work, my cousin had said then, not realizing her voice carried. Well, my father had replied with that same mocking laugh he used tonight, she'll learn. Some people were meant to follow, not lead. They'd laughed so loudly that night the waiter had actually glanced at me, unsure if he should intervene. I'd smiled through it then, the same way I smiled tonight. Only back then I had no power. Just shame. The restaurant itself became etched into my memory as a symbol of that night. I avoided this street for years. The sound of the bell over the door, the smell of garlic bread, the creak of the leather seats, they all triggered the same dull sting. And yet here I was, sitting in the exact same seat. By choice. My eyes scanned the room now, not as the humiliated woman they once mocked, but as someone who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. The sconces on the walls still threw golden pools of light across the tables. The bar with its neat row of bottles gleamed under warm pendant lamps. The same hostess, older now, her hair streaked with silver, stood by the entrance. When our eyes met, recognition flickered. She didn't smile out of politeness. She smiled like someone who remembered. I tilted my head slightly. She nodded once. Quiet understanding. Why is he making a speech? My sister whispered sharply, leaning toward Dad. I don't know, he muttered, glancing at me with narrowed eyes. Probably wants to show off that we've got a black card at the table. Their assumption was so predictable it almost amused me. They couldn't imagine a world where I was the reason for attention. In their minds, I was still the woman who'd moved back into her childhood room with nothing but boxes and unpaid bills. But I wasn't that woman anymore. And this place, their stage, had quietly become mine. As the GM began thanking the guests for their patience before a small announcement, my focus drifted again to that pivotal night years ago. After their laughter had faded and dessert plates were cleared, I'd excused myself and stepped outside into the biting cold. I remember leaning against the brick wall near the alley, my breath coming out in trembling clouds. I had cried, not loudly, just quiet tears that froze against my cheeks. A woman from the kitchen had come out for a smoke break. She'd offered me a tissue and said gently, "People laugh because they don't see the ending yet. Just the middle." I'd never forgotten that line. It was here, shivering in the dark, that something inside me shifted. I decided that night I wouldn't keep waiting for their approval. I would build something so solid that their laughter would one day echo back at them. "Are we supposed to clap or something?" my brother-in-law joked, breaking my reverie. His smugness was almost comforting in its familiarity. I met his gaze directly. "You might want to wait," I said evenly. He frowned, not sure if I was serious. The GM continued, his voice confident but warm. "Tonight is a special evening for many reasons," he began. "But before we get to that, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has quietly made a difference to this place." Dad chuckled. "Here it comes," he whispered loudly, assuming the attention was aimed at him. He lifted his glass slightly. I didn't correct him. Not yet. The flashback folded seamlessly into the present, like a tide retreating back into the sea. I could almost feel the icy February air on my skin as I looked around this warm dining room. It struck me how little they remembered, how easily they dismissed the pain they caused. To them that night was just dinner. To me it was the night the story changed direction. I shifted slightly in my seat, crossing my legs slowly. The subtle sound of fabric brushing leather echoed softly beneath the GM's words. My father's eyes caught the movement, not because it meant anything in itself, but because he was suddenly aware that I was too calm. He always noticed when I wasn't shrinking. My sister leaned toward me. "What is this about?" she whispered. "You'll see," I said simply. That answer bothered her more than anything else. Control had never sat easily with her unless it was in her own hands. The GM gestured toward the corner near the bar, a small framed photograph on the wall. I followed his gaze. It was a picture taken during the restaurant's reopening 3 years ago. Most people wouldn't have noticed me in it, standing off to the side, hair tied back, wearing a plain black blazer. But I noticed. Because I was the one who wrote the check that allowed this place to survive. They didn't need to know all the details yet. That reveal had its own time. But I allowed myself a small, private smile. Dad finally noticed my expression. "What are you smiling at?" he asked sharply. "Memories," I said, looking straight at him. He laughed, but there was a tiny tremor beneath it. "You always were sentimental." "Not anymore," I replied softly. The waiter returned briefly to refill water glasses. His hands didn't tremble, but he gave me that respectful nod again, one that didn't go unnoticed this time. My cousin stared at the interaction, her brow furrowed as if she was solving a puzzle she didn't know existed. Little cracks were forming in their certainty. Tiny, satisfying cracks. I thought again of that cold February night, how I'd walked home alone, cheeks raw, heart burning, swearing silently that the next time they sat at this table with me they wouldn't laugh. They would listen. And now here we were. The GM continued speaking, slowly leading toward his actual announcement, but I didn't rush him. Every second of their puzzled faces was worth years of endurance. I could see the waitress from the kitchen peeking out from behind the curtain. Older now, still with the same tired kindness in her eyes. She recognized me too. That night she had handed me a tissue and said something I didn't forget. And now she was here to witness the reversal. My father finally broke. "All right, enough suspense," he said louder than necessary. "If you've got something to say, say it." The GM paused mid-sentence, his timing impeccable. He turned slowly toward Dad. "Oh, I do," he said politely. "But I think it'll mean more if everyone listens closely." The restaurant quieted further, diners turning their heads toward our table. My father shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all evening the laughter wasn't his. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, hands folded neatly. The place where they laughed at me had become the place where I was finally going to rewrite the story. And the best part? They still didn't see it coming. The GM's voice rose just enough to carry over the soft clinking of glasses and low jazz. Conversations at surrounding tables thinned out, replaced by curious glances toward us. A few diners craned their necks, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. My family exchanged confused looks. My father straightened his jacket, trying to reclaim authority he didn't realize he'd already lost. My sister leaned closer to my cousin, whispering too loudly, "What is going on?" I didn't answer. I simply folded my hands in my lap and fixed my gaze on the GM. Inside, I could feel the faint tremor of anticipation coiled deep in my chest. Not nerves, but the weight of a moment I had waited years for. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the GM began, his tone warm but commanding. "Before we continue, I'd like to take a brief moment to acknowledge someone very important to this establishment." Dad gave a short laugh, lifting his glass slightly, already assuming he was the star. That was his habit, to step into the spotlight whether or not it belonged to him. The GM continued, unfazed. "This restaurant has seen many ups and downs over the years. Some of you may remember the winter when we nearly closed our doors for good. It was a difficult time, but it was also when we discovered what community really means." I watched my father's smirk falter just a touch. My sister looked at him, expecting his name to come next. Instead, the GM turned, his gaze settling directly on me. "And that's why," he said clearly, "tonight we want to express our gratitude to someone whose quiet support helped us rebuild. Ms. Ross, our reputation stands because of you." The room shifted. A subtle, collective intake of breath. A few diners turned fully in their seats to look at me. The waiter nearest to us straightened. The hostess near the door clasped her hands together, smiling softly in recognition. I didn't move right away. I let the words settle in the air, like a soft bell ringing in a quiet room. My father blinked, looking from the GM to me as if his brain was trying to reorder the scene. "Ms. Ross?" he repeated, half laughing. "What is this?" My sister frowned. "Wait, you." "Yes," the GM replied before I could. "Her." I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my face stayed calm. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something deeper, a quiet, steady satisfaction that didn't need theatrics. For years, my family had taken pleasure in public moments that diminished me. Tonight I allowed myself this moment in return. The GM gestured toward the framed photo on the wall near the bar. 3 years ago, when this restaurant faced closure, Ms. Ross stepped in. She believed in what we do here. She didn't ask for public credit, but tonight we wanted to make sure she received it. Whispers spread through the dining room. I caught fragments from nearby tables. "She helped them." "Is that her?" "She looks so composed." The sound of those whispers didn't make me shrink the way it once would have. Instead, it steadied me. My father let out a sharp laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, isn't that something?" he said, clapping his hands once too loudly. "My daughter the hero. Who would have thought?" The sarcasm dripped like old paint. The GM didn't flinch. "We all thought," he said with a polite smile. "She's been part of our family here ever since. Many of us owe her more than words can say." The word family hung in the air differently this time. It didn't belong to my father anymore. My sister recovered faster than the others. "I had no idea," she said to me, her voice tight. "When did you get involved with them?" I turned toward her, my tone measured. "A while ago." "That's nice," she replied, though the corners of her mouth twitched with unease. Across the table, my cousin shifted uncomfortably. She looked down at her glass, swirling the wine as if the answer might be hiding at the bottom. The GM continued, "This place wouldn't be what it is today without Ms. Ross. Her belief gave us the strength to rebuild. So, on behalf of our entire team," he turned toward the staff who had quietly gathered near the bar, "we want to thank her." The staff applauded. Not a roaring ovation, but a genuine, respectful clap that carried through the room. My father's face turned the color of fading brick. He forced a smile, the muscles in his jaw tightening. I could tell he hated every second of attention that wasn't his. My sister attempted a polite clap, unsure of the script. My brother-in-law leaned back, eyes narrowed. He didn't like surprises, especially ones that shifted power away from his side of the table. I didn't stand. I didn't bow. I didn't deliver a speech. I simply nodded toward the staff, offering a warm but contained smile. "Thank you," I said quietly. And that was enough. Because the more restrained I was, the louder their silence became. The GM leaned in slightly toward me. "We've always appreciated your discretion," he said softly, just for me. "But tonight felt like the right night." I met his eyes. "It is." My father noticed the exchange. "You two seem friendly," he said sharply. The GM straightened. "She's part of this place's story," he replied simply. The weight of that sentence settled on the table like a heavy book. Then, almost on cue, a nearby diner, an older woman with silver hair tucked into a neat bun, leaned toward our table. "I remember that winter," she said kindly. "I'm glad someone stepped in. I didn't know it was you, dear." Her voice had the kind of gentle authority that makes people listen. I smiled at her. "I didn't need anyone to know," I replied. My father forced a laugh again. "Well, you kept it quiet all right," he said, a brittle edge under his humor. "What else have you been hiding?" I met his gaze steadily. "Enough." His smile faltered completely. Small ripples spread through my family's expressions. My sister's pride was dented. My cousin's smugness slipped. My brother-in-law avoided my eyes altogether. They weren't just surprised, they were unsettled. Because this wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was quiet recognition from strangers, staff, and the GM. Recognition they couldn't control or redirect. And that unnerved them far more than shouting ever could. The restaurant's atmosphere took on a new texture. The jazz still played, but it seemed softer, like background music to a scene I'd written years in advance. The flickering candles no longer framed me as the awkward shadow at the table. They illuminated me. I noticed the hostess whispering to a waiter, both of them smiling subtly in my direction. The older woman who'd spoken to me gave a slight nod, like someone silently cheering from the sidelines. I'd been invisible here once. Now I was unforgettable. Dad cleared his throat, trying to steer the night back toward himself. "Well," he said loudly, "it's good to know the restaurant has friends. But this is a family dinner, not a charity banquet." The GM gave a courteous nod. "Of course, sir. Enjoy your evening." But as he turned to leave, he added, "And thank you again, Ms. Ross." "Truly." "Any time," I said softly. The surrounding diners returned to their meals, but their occasional glances lingered. The whispers didn't fade entirely. The night had shifted and everyone knew it. As the GM walked away, my father leaned toward me. "Why didn't you tell us?" His voice was low, clipped. I took a sip of water before answering. "Because I didn't need to." "That's not how families work," he hissed. I met his eyes, unwavering. "Maybe not this family." His jaw tightened. He sat back, muttering something I didn't care to hear. In that moment, a quiet realization settled over me. This wasn't just about a restaurant. It wasn't even about money. It was about rewriting the way they saw me, and more importantly, the way I saw myself at this table. For years, I'd been the one sitting in the corner, enduring their jabs. Tonight, I was the anchor in the room. And I still hadn't played my final card. As the murmurs settled and plates were cleared, the atmosphere at the table felt different, charged, uneasy. My father's voice no longer dominated the air. Instead, the faint sound of jazz returned to the forefront, joined by the occasional clink of silverware from nearby diners who pretended not to watch us. I sat back in my chair, letting the moment breathe. My hands rested loosely in my lap, but my mind was sharp, deliberate. For years I'd been the one absorbing their words, swallowing my hurt. Tonight I was the one holding the silence, and they were the ones filling it with nervous chatter. My sister broke first. "Well," she said lightly, twirling her wine glass between her fingers, "this turned out to be quite an evening." Her laugh was thin, the kind that hides discomfort. "Yes," my father replied, his tone clipped. "Quite the surprise." His eyes met mine. There was no warmth in them anymore, just calculation. He was trying to reassert himself, to figure out where he'd lost control of the story. I met his stare calmly. "Surprises can be instructive," I said. My cousin shifted in her seat. "You could have told us," she said cautiously, "about your involvement here. We all thought." I raised a brow. "You all thought what?" She faltered. "Nothing. Just, it's unexpected." "Good," I said evenly. "I prefer it that way." The waiter returned with a tray of dessert menus, but I gently waved him off. "No dessert for me," I said. "I'm good." Across the table, Dad signaled for coffee, his movements sharp, controlled. He was buying time. That's what he did whenever he was cornered. Shift the tempo, redirect the narrative. "You've made quite the impression tonight," he said after the waiter left. "But I hope you're not expecting a standing ovation from us. We're family, not your audience." "I don't need an ovation," I replied. "I came for something else." The words hung between us like smoke. He didn't like that. His frown deepened. The server returned with a fresh pot of coffee. As he poured for my father, he gave me a subtle look. A quick glance, respectful but knowing. It was the kind of look people give someone they recognize as having quiet authority. My father noticed. "Why does everyone keep looking at you like that?" he snapped. The server froze for a fraction of a second. I stepped in before he could stammer. "Because they remember what I did for this place," I said simply. Dad leaned back, crossing his arms. "And what exactly did you do?" I didn't answer directly. "Dad," I smiled. "Enough." His jaw tightened. The bill had not yet arrived, but I knew it would soon. And when it did, things would shift again. Because tonight wasn't about generosity. It was about strategy. I didn't come to pay. I came to collect, not money but a moment. A correction. A reckoning years in the making. I glanced toward the counter. The GM stood with the cashier, reviewing something on the screen. He caught my eye briefly and gave the slightest nod, as if to say everything's in place. The weight of what was about to happen pressed against the edges of my composure, but I held steady. After all, I'd been preparing for this longer than any of them knew. My sister leaned toward me, curiosity getting the better of her. "You seem awfully calm," she said quietly. "I am," I replied. She searched my face for a crack, some hint of the flustered woman she remembered. She didn't find it. "You're different," she murmured. "I should hope so," I said. "It's been years." Her eyes softened for just a moment, but then she looked away, uncomfortable with what she saw. The waiter approached the table carrying the familiar black leather bill folder. This time his posture was formal, almost ceremonial. My father straightened immediately, ready to take control of the check as he always did, to play the magnanimous patriarch in front of his audience. But the waiter didn't hand it to him. He placed it directly in front of me. The sound of leather against wood was louder than it should have been. My father's face darkened. "I'll take that," he said, reaching across the table. The waiter froze, looking to me. I didn't move. "It's fine," I said to the waiter. "Leave it here." "Yes, ma'am," he said, stepping back respectfully. My father's hand lingered in the air for a second before retreating. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low. "Exactly what I came here to do," I replied. He huffed, leaning back in his chair like a man trying to pretend he's not losing ground. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. I opened the bill folder slowly, not because I needed to, but because I knew every movement mattered now. Inside was the receipt, printed neatly along with a small note. "Already processed. Thank you, Ms. Ross." I could feel my sister's gaze burning into the side of my face. Processed, she asked. You already paid? Not exactly, I said softly. The GM approached at that exact moment, his timing as precise as ever. Everything taken care of? He asked pleasantly. Yes, I replied. Just as we arranged. My father's head snapped toward him. Arranged. The GM turned to him with the polite, practiced smile of a man who'd dealt with countless difficult patrons. Sir. The bill has been charged accordingly. It's all settled. My father frowned. Charged to who? The GM glanced at me for a brief moment, then back at him. To you, sir. The silence that followed was delicious. My father blinked as if the words had physically struck him. What? The GM kept his tone neutral. As per the details we have on file, the primary account associated with tonight's reservation was charged. The receipt should reflect that. My father snatched the folder from my hands and stared at the slip. His face flushed red. This is my card. Yes, I said, my voice even. It is. He slammed the folder shut. You planned this? Yes, I admitted without hesitation. Every part of it. My sister's jaw dropped. Wait, you charged him? I turned toward her. I didn't charge him. The system did. Dad's hands curled around the folder. You set me up, he spat. I met his glare calmly. No. I gave you a chance to treat me with respect tonight. You chose mockery. So I decided to remind you who actually had the power at this table. His face darkened further, but his voice dropped into a dangerous whisper. You think this makes you clever? No, I said. It makes me done. Around us, the restaurant continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Dishes clinked. Glasses chimed. Jazz played on. But at our table the world had narrowed to a single sharp point. My father was always the one to control the narrative, to make me the punchline, to dictate who mattered. For years I played along. Tonight I flipped the script with quiet precision. The GM stepped back respectfully, sensing this was no longer his scene. The waiter hovered at a distance, ready if needed, but wisely silent. My brother-in-law finally spoke. Why go through all this? He asked, baffled. You could have just told him off. I turned to him, my expression cool. Because words fade. Moments don't. He didn't have a reply for that. He looked away. My father sat stiffly, folder still clutched in his hands like evidence. He'd been exposed not through shouting or insults, but through a system he didn't understand was never built around him. The thing about power is, it's quiet when it's real. I leaned forward slightly. I didn't come here to pay, I said softly. I came to collect. And I think I just did. He glared at me, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not just anger but recognition. He finally understood that the daughter he once mocked had outmaneuvered him. My sister looked between us, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. She chose silence. My cousin reached for her purse awkwardly, as if pretending to look busy. My brother-in-law cleared his throat. I sat back, breathing slowly. My heartbeat was steady. For once I wasn't reacting. I was leading. The GM returned briefly to thank us again, but I barely heard him. My father was still frozen in disbelief, the weight of the night pressing down on him. And as the candles flickered low, I knew this wasn't the end, not yet. One final piece remained. The candles flickered low, their soft glow casting shifting shadows across the table. My father still held the bill folder in his hands like a man clutching the last word in an argument he'd already lost. His face was pale under the dim light, but his jaw was set hard, refusing to accept the weight of what had just happened. I watched him in silence. I'd spent years filling those silences with explanations, apologies, or nervous laughter. Tonight I let the silence belong to me. My sister was the first to break it. Dad, she said cautiously, her voice softer than before, maybe just let it go. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching for some cue, some familiar weakness she could anchor to. She didn't find it. My father's lips parted, then closed again. He wasn't used to losing control, especially not at a dinner table, and definitely not to me. I don't like surprises, he finally muttered. I leaned forward slightly. I know, I said. That's why this one mattered. The waiter came by with a tray of after-dinner mints. No one touched them. He sensed the tension immediately and slipped away without a word. Around us, other tables buzzed with soft conversations, forks scraping plates, glasses clinking. But here, everything felt still, like the air itself was holding its breath. My father finally set the folder down. "You think this proves something?" he asked. His voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual bravado. "It doesn't prove anything," I said. "It shows something. There's a difference." He stared at me, and for the first time all evening he didn't have a comeback. My sister reached for her purse, fiddling with the clasp just to have something to do. "I had no idea," she said softly. "All this time, you were involved here?" "Yes," I replied. "For years." "Why didn't you tell us?" I met her gaze. Because every time I shared anything, it became a punchline. A family anecdote to pass around the table. Some things are better built in silence. Her expression softened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She just nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something she should have seen long ago. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly. "You think owning a piece of a restaurant makes you powerful?" I shook my head. "No. Power isn't about what you own. It's about what you control." His brows furrowed. "And what do you control?" I looked at him steadily. "This moment. This story. For once, it's not yours to twist." He scoffed, but there was no real strength behind it. "You really planned all this just to embarrass me?" "No," I said evenly. "I planned this to stop you." He frowned. "Stop me?" "Yes. From laughing at me like I'll never change. From treating me like the broken woman who came back home with nothing. From pretending you built everything while I just lingered in the background. I wanted you to see me." The words hung between us, heavy and unflinching. His eyes flickered, betraying something deeper. Guilt, maybe. Or just the first hint of recognition. The GM returned quietly to check in. "Everything all right here?" he asked politely. "Yes," I said without looking away from my father. "Perfect." He nodded, sensing his cue, and moved on. My brother-in-law finally spoke up. "I still don't get it," he said, shaking his head. "All this, for what?" "To prove a point." I turned toward him, my tone calm but firm. "Not to prove a point. To reclaim one." He blinked, unsure how to respond. My cousin stayed silent, staring down at her empty plate like it might offer her an escape route. The older woman at the nearby table, the one who had spoken earlier, leaned slightly toward us again. "Good for you," she said quietly, but her words carried. "Sometimes people need to be reminded of what they dismissed." Her husband gave a small, approving nod. My father's face tightened at the intrusion, but he said nothing. He couldn't. For the first time in my life, strangers in the room weren't laughing at me. They were watching him squirm. My sister cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember that night," she said suddenly. "The one years ago. Here. When everyone laughed." Her admission caught me off guard. "You said you were going to try again," she continued. "With the bakery. Dad made jokes all night. And I laughed too." Her voice cracked on the last word. I studied her face. She wasn't deflecting. He was remembering. I nodded slowly. "Yes. I remember." She looked down. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet but real. They settled between us like something fragile finally being set down. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The apology was enough. My father wasn't ready to go that far. He shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers against the table. "People joke," he muttered defensively. "No, Dad," I said softly. "You joke. You always have. And for a long time I let you. But tonight isn't about jokes. It's about endings." The GM dimmed the lights slightly. The universal restaurant queue that dinner service was winding down. Staff began quietly resetting nearby tables. The night had thinned to its final layer. My father looked at me, searching for something in my face. Control. Weakness. He found none. "You've changed," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "I had to." Then came the final twist, the part no one at that table expected. I reached into my purse and took out a neatly folded document. I didn't place it in front of him dramatically. I just set it on the table beside my water glass. "What's that?" my sister asked. I slid it toward my father. "The formal paperwork making me the majority owner of this restaurant," I said. He froze. The GM, who had quietly returned to stand nearby, confirmed it with a nod. She finalized the transfer earlier this week, he said. We were going to make an announcement next month, but tonight seemed appropriate. The look on my father's face was indescribable. Shock first, then disbelief, then something quieter. He stared at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't speak. I continued, my voice steady. This isn't just about a dinner bill, Dad. This place, the one where you once laughed at me, is mine now. Not a piece. Not a silent corner. Mine. My sister covered her mouth with her hand. My cousin whispered something under her breath. My father sat back slowly, the reality setting in. You bought it out, he said hoarsely. Yes, I said. Quietly. While you were busy underestimating me. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the restaurant's closing routine. Then finally my father let out a low, breathless laugh. But it wasn't mocking this time. It was hollow. Disarmed. You really did it, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. There was the shift. The power he once held over me had dissolved, not with shouting or public humiliation, but through years of quiet work and one carefully constructed night. I leaned back, breathing in the moment. Not out of revenge alone, but out of something cleaner. Closure. The GM approached once more, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. Congratulations again, Ms. Ross, he said warmly. We're lucky to have you. Thank you, I replied. My father didn't say another word. He just stared at the papers, his fingers resting on the edge like he might wake up from a dream. But this wasn't his story anymore. We all rose to leave. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. My sister gave me a quiet, lingering look before stepping aside. My cousin avoided eye contact entirely. My brother-in-law muttered a quick goodbye. My father stood slowly, like a man adjusting to new ground beneath his feet. I held the door open not out of obligation, but because this time I was the one who decided when the night ended. As we stepped outside, the cool air met my skin like a clean slate. The streetlights glowed softly. The night was still. Behind us, the staff began locking up, their laughter echoing faintly through the closing doors. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was warm, alive. A sound that no longer belonged to my family's mockery. I turned back once to look through the glass. My reflection stared back at me, steady, unflinching, entirely my own. That night, the laughter finally stopped. And I was the one who ended it. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Join our growing community of women who love powerful, emotional revenge stories. Your support keeps these stories alive.